I was 27 the night I finally saw the man I had married for money for who he truly is. Cruel, calculated, dangerous, ruthless. The memory is etched in my mind. The sharp scent of cigars, the cold marble pressing against my feet, and that smile, that empty, smug smile that had tormented me for months. Then he removed his mask, and suddenly every lie, every humiliation, every manipulation snapped into place. I knew my moment had come. In that instant, I knew exactly what I had to do on. Nothing would ever be the same. What happened next changed both our lives forever, and the moment he realized it would haunt him for the rest of his life. My name is Clara. I was 27 years old when I first realized that the life I had chosen for stability had become a cage. I had married Victor, 58, polished and calculated for money. Not for love, not for companionship, but for security, for the promise of a life I could never have dreamed of on my own. At least, that is what I told myself. And yet, every time I walked through the cold marble floors of his mansion, through the echoing hallways lined with heavy drapes and gilded frames, I felt smaller, invisible. Every step I took sounded hollow. Every sigh seemed swallowed by the vast oppressive space. My chest was tight, my breath shallow, and I wondered constantly if this was the price I had to pay for survival. Victor had a way of smiling that drew admiration from everyone else, that made him look like the epitome of charm and success. But behind closed doors, the mask fell. He was cruel, controlling, subtle in his manipulations, and terrifying in the way he enjoyed undermining me without leaving a trace for the world to see. I remember the first time I felt the full weight of it. We had been at a charity gala, his arm around me, whispering compliments that anyone else would have found flattering. But as soon as the cameras and socialites were out of sight, he would sneer, belittle me, or remind me of every misstep, every perceived flaw. He had this way of looking at me that made me feel like I was nothing. And one night, that look changed everything. I tried to convince myself I had made the right choice. I told myself I would learn to endure, that wealth and security were worth the humiliation and loneliness. But deep down, I knew better. Victor enjoyed every second of my quiet suffering. He thrived on my discomfort, my hesitation, my attempts to be perfect in a world he controlled. He manipulated my finances, subtly restricting my access, reminding me constantly that my freedom was conditional, that my choices belonged to him more than they belonged to me. The mansion itself reflected his control. The grand chandeliers cast shadows that stretched across the marble floors like silent sentinels, watching every move I made. The faint tap of rain on the tall windows was a constant reminder of the storm I could never escape. Always outside, always pressing in. The faint, lingering scent of his expensive cologne followed me from room to room, a symbol of his omnipresence, a reminder that I was never alone, never free. Yet it was not just the physical space that weighed on MIT, was the psychological one. Every conversation, every social gathering, every whispered remark seemed designed to remind me of my position, of what I owed him simply by existing within his orbit. And I began to notice the patterns. He would praise me when others were watching, painting me as the ideal wife. But in private, he would ridicule me, exploit my vulnerabilities, and make me doubt my own worth. I was trapped, and the worst part was the betrayal I felt against myself. I had given up my independence for safety, and yet safety felt like a cage with no lock I could find. I can still recall the nights spent alone in our bedroom, the ornate curtains drawn, the room silent except for the occasional crack of thunder outside. I would lie on the silk sheets, my hands clutching the edge, listening to the rhythm of my own heartbeat as it echoed in the emptiness. I questioned every choice that had led me here. Did I really need to marry him? Could I have made it on my own? Could I have been happy without the weight of his expectations pressing down on me? And then there were the subtle moments of cruelty that cut deeper than any overt insult. A hand brushing mine and pulling away. A compliment that felt more like a challenge. A financial decision made without me that reminded me I had no say. Each action, small as it seemed, piled on top of the last, until I began to feel invisible even to myself. I tried to tell myself it would get better, but I knew the truth. He enjoyed this. He enjoyed the way I shrank in his presence, the way I second-guessed my every word and movement. I was trapped, powerless, craving freedom with a desperation I could hardly admit even to myself. And it was in those moments, feeling the cold marble beneath my hands, listening to the rain patter against the windows, that I began to understand something had to change. Something had to give. If you have ever been pushed aside, spoken over, or quietly betrayed by people you trusted, you are not alone. Stories like this are not about anger. They are about endurance, clarity, and what happens when someone finally stops explaining themselves. If that kind of story matters to you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. What comes next is not loud, but it is deliberate, and it changes everything. The tension in the mansion was a constant, invisible presence, pressing down on me like the weight of the storm clouds outside. Every morning, I walked through the grand hallways, my heels clicking against the cold marble, and I could feel Victor's eyes on me, even when he was not in the room. He had a way of watching that was patient, calculating, as if he was measuring every inch of me, every gesture, every expression, for some private amusement. I hated it. I hated the fear it stirred in my chest, and yet I could not look away. At first, it was subtle, a careless comment about my appearance, a slight twist of his lips when I spoke. He would compliment me in front of guests, calling me elegant, charming, flawless, while privately mocking me for my hesitation, my mistakes, my very existence. The duality made me question myself, my instincts, my judgment. But over time, the cruelty escalated. I began noticing the pattern, and it terrified me. He was not impulsive. He was deliberate. One evening, at a dinner with some of his business associates, I poured wine for him and nearly spilled. He did not raise his voice. He smiled, polite, flawless, as he whispered in my ear, "You always find ways to disappoint me. Do not you, Clara?" I forced a laugh, pretending to brush it off, while my hands trembled under the table. That whisper haunted me for hours, echoing in my mind. I could not eat, could not focus, could not stop thinking about the way he had made me feel like a child caught misbehaving. Then there were the financial manipulations. He would approve some extravagant purchase for himself, then lecture me on overspending when I bought something small. Every transaction, every check, every bank statement became a subtle reminder that he controlled not just my body, but my life. The mansion, the servants, the cars, all of it was his domain, and I was a guest in my own existence. I realized how little I had left that was truly mine. The nights were worse. I would lie awake in our king-size bed, the sheets heavy and suffocating, listening to the creak of the old house settling. Victor would sit at his desk in the adjoining study, reading documents or speaking quietly into the phone, his tone calm, commanding. Sometimes I imagined him plotting ways to keep me under control, ways to tighten the invisible chains that held me here. I began counting the seconds until I could leave the room, until I could breathe without his scrutiny. His cruelty often came disguised as concern. He would offer advice that felt helpful on the surface, only to undermine me later. He would introduce me to influential people, then subtly discredit me behind their backs. Every social gathering, every public event became a minefield. I could feel the eyes on me, judging me, waiting for me to slip, and he delighted in the anticipation. I began to fear not only him, but the world he had shaped around me, a world designed to remind me of my place. One rainy afternoon, I returned home to find a letter waiting on my desk. It was from a law firm he had retained, outlining new restrictions on my spending, my travel, my autonomy. The words were cold, precise, and they cut deeper than any insult. I could feel my chest tighten, my stomach knotting. That day, I understood that this was not just control. This was a deliberate, orchestrated effort to break me, piece by piece. The subtle taunts became more brazen. He would leave notes, small but humiliating, around the house. A word here, a phrase there, each one a reminder of my dependence, my vulnerability. And yet, in the midst of this torment, I noticed cracks in his behavior. Moments when he was careless, when his arrogance betrayed a fear of being discovered. I began to pay attention, to study him, and a dangerous thought began to form in my mind. Maybe there was a way to turn this around. Every interaction with him became a battle of wits. I had to think before I spoke, before I moved, before I even breathed. And the more I complied, the more he escalated. The more he humiliated, the more he tested the limits of my endurance. I realized that the person who had seemed untouchable, invincible, might actually have weaknesses. And the thought both terrified and excited me. By the time I reached my breaking point, I was exhausted both mentally and physically. The mansion felt smaller, suffocating, the shadows longer, the rain louder. And yet, in the center of that fear, that tension, that anger, I began to feel something else: resolve. I would not remain a victim. I would find a way to reclaim my life, piece by piece, just as he had tried to take it from me. The night it all broke, I remember the air felt heavier than usual, thick with the storm raging outside. Rain pounded against the windows, drumming a relentless rhythm that seemed to echo the pounding in my chest. I had just returned from yet another charity gala one, where Victor had smiled at the guests, praised my poise, while quietly tearing me apart in whispers when no one was watching. Every compliment, every pat on the back had been a lie, every smile a weapon. That night, something inside me shifted. I could no longer pretend. I walked into the mansion, the marble floors slick with the damp chill carried in by my heels. The chandeliers above cast long, distorted shadows across the walls, as if the house itself was bending, watching, anticipating. Victor was in the study, glass of brandy in hand, his eyes glinting as he regarded me with that same smug expression I had come to loathe. I felt a surge of fury, raw and uncontainable, and it scared me how quickly it rose. He did not speak immediately. He waited, as he always did, savoring the moment when I would falter, when I would shrink under the weight of his attention. But this time, I did not falter. My chest heaved, my jaw clenched, and I realized with startling clarity that fear no longer had power over me. I had reached the end of my endurance. There was no going back. Victor leaned forward slightly, his voice calm, measured. "You look tired, Clara. Perhaps you are finally realizing that this life is not easy for everyone." His words dripped with condescension. I felt my stomach knot a familiar tension twisting my insides. And yet, beneath the anger, something else stirred a spark of clarity. For the first time, I began to see him as he truly was, a man who thrived on control, who depended on my compliance for his power. I looked around the room at the opulent bookshelves, the polished oak desk, the faint glow of the lamp reflecting in the glass of his brandy. The air smelled faintly of tobacco, his cologne, and something metallic like the tension before a storm breaks. My hands were trembling, not with fear, but with anticipation. I realized that if I did not act soon, I would be trapped forever in his carefully constructed cage. The breaking point came with the smallest insult, the quietest dismissal. He mentioned, almost casually, that my contributions to the gala had been adequate, but not remarkable. The words were soft, polite to anyone else, but to me they were a dagger. I could feel the heat rising in my face, my chest tightening, my mind spinning with every injustice I had endured, every humiliation I had swallowed. I had spent months counting seconds, enduring nights of silent misery, and now every moment of suffering screamed for recognition. I stepped closer, my heels echoing against the marble, my heart pounding like a drum. Adequate. I repeated, my voice low, steady. Do you have any idea what that word means to someone who has spent years being erased in your shadow? Victor tilted his head, smiling, as if my anger was a performance he was enjoying. But this time, I was not performing. This time, I was alive with purpose, and he could sense it. In that moment, I understood something vital. My suffering had given me a map. Every manipulation, every belittling remark, every subtle attempt to control me had left clues. I knew how he operated. I knew his weaknesses. I knew the cracks in his perfect facade. And for the first time, I realized that power could shift in ways he would never anticipate. I left the study abruptly, rain hitting the windows harder as if urging me forward. The mansion felt different, now smaller, less imposing, as if the shadows had lost their weight. My thoughts raced, weaving through every humiliation, every betrayal, every stolen moment of peace. I began to see a path, a strategy, a way to reclaim not just my dignity, but my life. That night, I sat in the library, surrounded by the quiet hum of the storm outside. I traced Victor's movements in my mind, his patterns, his habits, the way he always assumed control without fear of challenge. And as I traced each detail, a plan began to form, careful, deliberate, and perfectly tailored to exploit every weakness he had shown me. I realized that the man who had made me feel powerless was, in fact, dangerously predictable. I felt something I had not felt in years, a sense of control. Not false control like the illusion he had imposed on me, but real control, born of awareness, observation, and resolve. Every nerve in my body hummed with anticipation, a quiet but steady pulse of power that told me I could change everything. I would not allow him to define me anymore. I would reclaim my life. I would make him see exactly what he had lost. And so, in the quiet of that storm-lashed night, I made a promise to myself. Not a threat, not a fleeting wish, but a concrete, unshakable decision. I would take back everything he had stolen from me. Every humiliation, every moment of invisibility, every ounce of power he had used to dominate me, would take it all back. And I would make sure he understood, down to the last detail, that I was no longer the person he could control. I spent the next few days watching him, studying him, memorizing every gesture, every routine. Victor moved through the mansion like he owned not just the place, but the world itself, confident that no one could touch him. And that confidence, I realized, was his greatest weakness. The more he believed himself untouchable, the easier it would be to dismantle him. I started small. I observed the doors he always left unlocked, the windows he neglected to secure, the servants who feared him so much they would never question his actions. Every tiny detail became a potential advantage. I realized I had a weapon in my awareness, one he could not anticipate, one he had never taught me to wield. The first step was gathering evidence. I found a folder tucked behind an antique book in the study, a folder that detailed his financial manipulations, secret investments, and shady business deals. The papers smelled faintly of old leather and dust, but the content was explosive. I felt a thrill run through me. This was not just revenge, was a map to destroy him where it hurt most. Next, I set traps to expose him socially. Every dinner, every gathering, I planted small hints of his indiscretions among trusted friends and acquaintances. I did it subtly, careful not to reveal my intentions, watching as doubt began to creep into the corners of his carefully curated image. I saw him noticing the small shifts, the sideways glances, the raised eyebrows, and I knew the panic had started. I also began reclaiming control in the house itself. I memorized his schedule, the times he checked his accounts, the moments he left doors unguarded. Each night I moved silently through the mansion, gathering more proof, leaving no trace of my activity. The marble floors were cold beneath my feet, the shadows long and distorted in the flickering lamplight. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant clap of thunder heightened my awareness. I felt alive in a way I had not in years. One night I confronted him in the study, not with anger, but with calculated calm. I let him see that I knew more than I had ever let on, that the invisible walls he had built around me were already crumbling. His eyes narrowed, sharp as knives, as he realized that I was no longer afraid. That realization alone was enough to make him uneasy. Then came the step that required precision, public exposure. I organized a dinner with several influential friends and business associates. Everything was planned meticulously. The lighting, the timing, the conversations I would start. The moment I had been waiting for was near, and the thrill of anticipation made my heart pound like a drum. As the evening unfolded, I planted subtle questions, mentioned casual observations, and guided conversations toward his hidden dealings. Victor smiled, unaware of the trap. But I could see the first flicker of doubt in his eyes, a twitch in his jaw, a quick glance around the room as if sensing the walls closing in. Each reaction was confirmation he was vulnerable, and I held the power now. I did not rush. Revenge is most potent when calculated. When delayed, when the target believes they are untouchable until the moment it is too late. I reminded myself of every humiliation, every subtle cruelty, and let them fuel my patience. The anticipation was exquisite. Every step, every breath, every glance was a part of the plan he could not see. Finally, the culmination of preparation came together. I had assembled evidence, sown doubt, and positioned witnesses in ways that guaranteed impact. Every financial manipulation, every secret deal, every public slight he had orchestrated would be revealed simultaneously, leaving no room for excuses or escape. I could imagine his face when the truth hit, the disbelief, the fear, the collapse of control he had relied on for decades. That night, as I moved through the mansion one last time before the reveal, I felt the weight of the storm against the windows, the chill of the marble under my hands, and the electricity in the air. Everything was in place. Everything was ready. And I knew with a certainty I had never felt before that Victor would finally see me as I had always been, powerful, unbroken, and unstoppable. I paused in the grand hallway, listening to the rain and the distant rumble of thunder. Each beat of my heart echoed in the silence, a reminder of the control I now possessed. Soon he would realize that the cage he had built around me had become a stage, and I had written the final act. The night of the reveal arrived like a storm I had been waiting for my entire life. The grand dining hall was bathed in warm, golden light, the chandeliers reflecting in the polished marble floors. Victor moved through the room as if he owned the air, confident, charming, untouchable. But I could feel this shift before he even noticed it. The walls he had built around himself, the persona he wore like armor, were starting to tremble. I guided the conversation subtly at first, speaking softly to a few key guests, planting questions and hints, letting curiosity and doubt ripple through the room. Victor smiled at every comment, oblivious, thinking he controlled the narrative. I felt a thrill, watching him dance on the edge of a trap he did not even know existed. Then came the moment I had been preparing for, the perfect crescendo. I presented a casual story about a recent business opportunity, weaving in details of his secret deals, his manipulations, his financial deceptions. Every detail was backed by evidence I had painstakingly collected. I watched as his confident expression faltered for the first time. His smile twitched. His hand shook ever so slightly. The air itself seemed to tighten around him. The room grew quiet. People leaned in, curious, sensing the tension. I continued, calm, controlled, letting the story unfold naturally, like water eroding stone. Every word, every pause, every glance was precise. I could see the panic rising in his eyes, a silent alarm that no one else could hear, but that screamed to me. I let one particularly damning fact slip, a financial scheme that would have ruined any ordinary person. Victor froze, his jaw tightening, eyes darting around the room as he realized the exposure was complete. The silence in the room was deafening. For once, he was powerless, and I was in control. Then I handed a document to a key guest, someone who had influence and credibility. The papers detailed his deceit, his secret manipulations, everything he had thought hidden. His face turned pale, a flush of panic creeping across his forehead. I felt my chest tighten with anticipation as I watched him realize the scope of his own downfall. The whispers began immediately. Guests murmured, exchanged glances, and a few outright gasped. Victor tried to recover, attempted a laugh, tried to charm his way out, but it was too late. The truth was undeniable, written in ink and backed by proof, displayed for all to see. I watched the layers of arrogance peel away, revealing a man exposed, terrified, and utterly defeated. Victor stammered, his words fumbling, unconvincing, and every lie he had told became a weapon against him. I noticed the tremor in his hands, the twitch of his eye, the way his posture sagged under the weight of his own undoing. I had imagined this moment countless times, but seeing it unfold in real life was a rush I could never have anticipated. As he faltered, I finally allowed myself to breathe fully, feeling the tightness in my chest ease, my shoulders relax. I realized that all the months of fear, humiliation, and silent endurance had led to this exact moment. For the first time in years, I felt the world tilt in my favor, and I could not stop the quiet laughter that rose inside me. The final blow came when a trusted business associate, one who had once admired Victor, spoke openly about the discoveries, confirming everything I had revealed. The room erupted in murmurs, a mixture of disbelief and outrage. Victor's confident, untouchable persona shattered completely. He looked around, searching for allies, for any escape, and found none. The isolation was complete, and I felt a fierce satisfaction that burned through every nerve in my body. I stepped forward at last, letting my gaze meet his. No words were needed. The silence between us carried the weight of every insult, every manipulation, every moment I had endured. He had built his empire on fear and control, and now he understood fully that neither would protect him. The storm outside mirrored the one inside me. Rain lashed against the windows, lightning illuminated the tense faces around the room, and thunder rumbled like the final punctuation on a sentence he had spent decades writing. I realized in that instant that my life had changed irrevocably, that the balance had shifted, and that I had reclaimed the power he had stolen. Victor sank into a chair, defeated, humiliated, powerless, while I stood tall, composed, unshaken. I could feel my pulse slow, the adrenaline fading, leaving a profound sense of triumph and clarity. I had endured, I had planned, and I had executed flawlessly. Justice at last had a face. That night, as the storm continued to rage outside, I walked through the mansion not as a prisoner, but as a victor. Every shadow seemed smaller, every corridor lighter. The cage had been shattered, and I was finally free. The mansion felt different after that night. The shadows no longer loomed with menace. The marble floors no longer echoed with the weight of fear. I walked through the hallways slowly, each step deliberate, savoring the silence, the calm that replaced the storm of manipulation and control. Victor was still here, still a presence in the house, but the power he had wielded over me was gone. It was strange, almost surreal, to realize how fragile his empire of intimidation had been all along. I spent hours that night in the library, tracing my fingers over the spines of books I had once ignored, inhaling the faint scent of old paper and polished wood. It was a scent of permanence, of knowledge, of something enduring, something he could not take from me. I understood in that quiet that true power was not about wealth or dominance, but about self-possession, clarity, and courage. Looking back, I realized how much I had underestimated myself. I had thought that marrying for money was a compromise, a surrender, but it had become a crucible. Every humiliation, every manipulation, every whispered insult had forced me to look deeper, to think sharper, to plan with precision. Without his cruelty, I might never have discovered the strength I had buried beneath years of fear. There were moments when the weight of what I had done pressed on me. Revenge is not easy, it is not clean, it leaves echoes. But each pang of doubt was tempered by the justice I had exacted. Victor had built his life on fear, on the illusion that no one could challenge him. That illusion had crumbled, and I had been the hammer. The thought brought a quiet, satisfying smile. I had endured years of subtle tyranny, and now he understood completely the cost of underestimating someone like me. The storm outside had faded by morning, leaving the world washed and glimmering. Rain dripped from the eaves, water pooled along the edges of the garden paths, and the scent of wet earth filled the air. It was symbolic, though I did not dwell on it consciously. Nature, like life, has a way of restoring balance. Karma, in its own way, had been patient but inevitable. I thought about the years I had spent shrinking. The nights filled with dread, the mornings where I convinced myself that enduring was the only option. And I realized something important. Those years were not wasted. Each moment of discomfort had taught me strategy, patience, and resilience. Each small humiliation had forged a mental clarity I would carry forever. My suffering had been transformed into power, my fear into foresight, my endurance into resolve. I walked through the grand hallways, touching the polished surfaces, the carved banisters, and felt no resentment. Not anymore. There was clarity instead, a sense of peace rooted in the knowledge that I had acted decisively, fairly, and with precision. Victor had no excuse, no opportunity for manipulation. The truth, once hidden, had been revealed. The balance had been restored. And in that restoration, I found a kind of beauty I had never expected, a liberation, not just from him, but from the version of myself that had feared living fully. I paused at the grand window overlooking the gardens, watching sunlight glint on wet leaves. The world outside was ordinary, unassuming, yet it felt infinitely larger than it had before. I had thought I would feel empty after my revenge. That satisfaction would be fleeting. But the calm that filled me was deeper than triumph. It was clarity, self-respect, and recognition of my own strength. For the first time in years, I felt fully, unapologetically alive. I understood then that justice is not about cruelty. It is about balance, which is about reclaiming what has been taken, asserting boundaries, and refusing to allow manipulation to define your life. Victor had taught me the cost of underestimation, and I had learned the value of awareness, preparation, and patience. I had walked through fire, and I emerged not burned but tempered, stronger, wiser, and free. The mansion would remain a place of memories, both dark and illuminating. But I no longer feared its walls or its echoes. Every step I took was mine alone, every decision guided by my own judgment, every breath unshackled by the past. I had turned suffering into strategy, humiliation into insight, and fear into action. And in that transformation, I discovered the truest form of power, the ability to reclaim your life, no matter how deeply it has been stolen. If this story moved you, hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more gripping tales of betrayal, courage, and revenge. Every story here is a reminder that even in the darkest moments, strength, patience, and clarity can turn the tables, and sometimes justice is more satisfying than we could ever imagine.